This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. My name's Michael Connolly and it is my pleasure to be your host on this journey of basket casey goodness. Joining me as usual is my brother and partner in more basket casey goodness. I'm going to have to think of something else to say, aren't I, Steve? Welcome, Steve.
Basket case brother.
No, that's you. You were brought in a basket. You got left on the doorstep. And Mum said the person who dropped you off said, if he ever starts lying, you take him back to the police. It's not true. It's not true. Gee, isn't it funny how quickly we get on a tangent?
Our podcast is just one or many tangents coinciding to create absolute brilliance. Just ask us. We're completely unbiased comment that.
Just ask us, yes. Basket case tangents.
I've missed you. It's been too long, as I often find myself saying between podcast episodes. And not that we don't, connect and rant about all things basket casey goodness off air, but it's so much more fun when we record it.
It is. And we have a really good chance to solve the problems of the universe, don't we?
We do. Yeah. We solved a lot of problems of the universe during COVID, didn't we? I remember that a lot more of our episodes then were done, from the comfort of our own home because we couldn't go anywhere else.
Yeah.
But and I'm sure we've talked about this in previous podcast episodes, but here in Queensland, bottle shops were an essential service. So they were open. We could get our red wine over which we could solve the problems of the world, which, look, again, completely unbiased opinion, we did.
But here's something interesting, and it reminds me of a great line from a classic movie called The Incredibles. When it doesn't matter
a classic
movie. It doesn't matter how many times you save the world; it continues to get back in jeopardy. Yeah. Like it doesn't matter how many times we solve the problems of basket case clubs. I have a saying that I've shared probably too many times with volunteers that as soon as you think you've got a foolproof plan, the universe throws a bigger fool at you. Interesting, but we have to be careful because it's very easy to just blame the person. When it comes to things that go wrong in clubs, it's very easy to blame the person. But often it's just that person delivering a system that was a shit system to begin with. A system, if you will. And if the system's no good, then it doesn't matter how good the people are, they're going to struggle to do a good job. They might improve the system, but when they're not given enough time, they're not given enough guidance, they're not given enough support to make the system better, then we're not setting them up to succeed as volunteers. We're not setting them up to succeed, volunteers or as staff. If these are people that we pay to do the job, we're not setting them up well. So we've been talking in this little mini series of ours about the challenges that volunteers face in the world of 2026. Well, look, it might be 2027, 28, 29 before we actually get to releasing this episode, but at least we're recording it in 2026, middle of the year, and we're in Queensland, so both of us are still in shirt sleeves.
Indeed, you, our listener, might be listening to this in some future year.
Exactly, yes. And I'll be interested on your take on it. Send us a ranty email if you like, if we get this wrong. But what I want to reflect on is how the world is different now from it used to be, specifically around volunteering. So when we both tell the story of Nana in a fictitious story about her volunteering at the Coburg Tennis Club, that may be a completely true story. I don't know. I've never actually checked with Dad to see if it is true.
And nor can we check with Nana.
Nor can we check with Nana. But I just think it's fascinating that a long time ago, people would do a lot for the club. But this was a time when clubs were run pretty much on a handshake agreement. If you shook hands with the mayor over the facility that you were occupying, that was as good as a lease. Now the pile of paperwork that volunteers are required to do just for leasing is big. There's a lot. But it's important because we've got to make sure we've got safe facilities. We've got to make sure that those facilities are fit for purpose. And we've got to make sure that those facilities are accessible, that the people in the community who need to access those facilities have their right to access it. They're paying through rates and taxes. So it all makes sense. But it's more than it used to be as far as the paperwork goes. But in those days when the paperwork was less and the compliance obligations were less, I think that there was a longer line of volunteers willing to do the work. Now, we can also say it was a different world back then. Economic circumstances were different when especially in Australia, where the multiple of annual average earnings that it takes to get to the average or median house price it's in, I think the way that economists refer to it is impossibly unaffordable. And I mean that seriously. That's actually the term. So it means that mums and dads have to make more money to pay for the mortgage, to pay for the house. And if they also want to then send their kids to a private school, drive a nice car, drink nice wine, eat nice food, then they need to work hard. So that reduces their availability for volunteering. But look, the end result, and there's not one thing that stops people from volunteering. Sometimes it's a lack of leadership. It's just this amorphous mass of people sitting around a table not making any decisions. That's not really leadership. And then that holds organizations back. So the volunteers don't feel supported. But it can stop people from volunteering in the first place as well. But I think that one of the big problems is that we don't have a queue of volunteers. So when you look at somebody like, I'll make up a person and call him Phil, and Phil could be Philip, or Phyllis. Like, I don't think that gender matters when it comes to the types of volunteers, but certainly Phil or Phyllis can end up doing a lot of work. Sometimes they do a lot of work because they just keep saying yes to things. But then how does that look to everyone else when they are president? But because the secretary is a bit of a lump, the Phil just says, "Oh, well, I'll go and do the work of the secretary as well. Bloody secretary doesn't do the work, blah, 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 blah," but does the work instead of empowering somebody else to do it and supporting somebody else to do it. Then marks lines, mows fields, cooks food, sells food, has meetings with council, deals with vandalism, deals with the police for break-ins and broken glass, deals with the insurance companies. And everyone else looks at Phil and goes, "I am not taking on that job." So I don't think that there's a long bench of, substitutes bench of volunteers willing to take Phil's place when they end up stepping away. So
Yeah, and
how do we deal with that?
I think that's the symptom. One of the actual diseases is no, I'm sure it goes deeper than this, but the connection that people have to their community organisation, their sporting club, whatever, and the importance that they feel from that role that they fill.
Well done. I see what you did there.
It was great.
Role that they PHIL.
It was coming out of my mouth. It made perfect sense. That's just how witty I am. I don't even need to think about being witty.
You're a type of wit.
So these people, and I know that I talk quite a bit about this because it's one of the real traps that I see people falling into, taking more and more on, exactly as you pointed out with that example of Phil. And then when the time comes, and the secretary doing a crappy job and me having to take that on to, pick up the slack that they're leaving behind, is actually, again, I think a dangerous step towards self-importance that is really difficult to step back from, because everyone else says, and often, let's face it, in our experience, some of these Phils have been quite bombastic, autocratic, my way or the highway type people. Not always, and I certainly want to be careful not to cast a blanket generalization here, but that again contributes to the decreasing likelihood that anyone else is going to stick up their hand to help Phil and anyone else that's still around out. And it becomes this kind of self-perpetuating problem that grows to the point where that person gets burnt out. I remember I used to play football at a club, and we had a president whose name was not Phil, and whose name I won't share to protect his anonymity. He's actually since died of a heart attack because he was such a highly strung, stressed out dude. But he was exactly like this. He just took on every job, every role that stuck its head up, because if he left it to someone else, they'd do a crap job. And he had a few experiences of that being a reality. But it got to the point where no one else wanted to. A few of us senior football players were on the committee, and we ended up stepping away because it was just such an unenjoyable environment to operate in. And you couldn't, if you tried to do a job, it'd get redone by the president anyway. So that's an extreme example, is where it was where burnout, and he was no longer volunteering, so it's not actually accurate to say his volunteer role caused his heart attack. But I'm sure that him being the sort of person that took more and more on and was that character in that club, may have contributed to his untimely death and being just so burnt out from probably other roles as well.
That's a pretty big incentive for getting this right, though, isn't it?
Yep, it is.
Correlation does not mean causation, and excessive volunteering may not have caused, let's just call him Phil, may not have caused Phil's death.
Yeah.
Kind of made it good, though, hey?
No, it kind of helped.
Yeah.
And not only that, it also didn't help the club. And for me, that's the lasting challenge that the club is left with, because then when Phil does move on, hopefully not to another dimension, but from the organisation to go and enjoy more time in their life outside of volunteering, we need to leave our organisations in a stronger place for us having been involved, so that they can continue to exist in perpetuity and continue to do the great work that they do. But unfortunately, again, one person taking on all the pressure doesn't contribute to long-term success of a club.
No. So we're lucky, Steve, because you and I have the microphones. So that means that we are the ones who can talk about the problems. But anyone who was sitting in front of a microphone, anyone who's involved in a voluntary association, voluntary club, voluntary society, as a volunteer or even as a staff member, has seen this firsthand. So every one of our listeners would be able to share just as many stories as we can. So I want to change the narrative or change the discussion a little bit to not necessarily how to fix it, because that can come almost naturally. We can almost arrive at a solution almost naturally, but it's actually identifying the problem. One of the things that I think is missing here is clarity on when there's a problem. When can volunteers see that they may be contributing to the problem, or what should volunteers be looking for in their peers and in their friends on the same committee or doing a similar volunteer role to help them avoid the burnout? So one of the things that I want to start on, and I did a little thing on this.
Can I just quickly interrupt, because I think that's a really important point, because I know you and I have spoken in the past about clients of ours, people with whom we've been working them in a voluntary capacity, and they've been approaching burnout and they haven't even been able to identify it themselves. And we've had to, and they've, said things like, oh, the AGM's coming up, and I said I just wouldn't take this role on again this year, but no one else has put up their hand, and I suppose I'll have to do it again. And sure, part of that might be the connection that they've got with that role and it being an important part of their identity. But it's also, I don't want to leave the club in the lurch. I don't want to be the one to step away when there's still all this work to happen and no one else steps up to do it.
And so it won't happen. And there's the assumption that it won't happen.
The club's been around.
I remember almost being shown the door and kicked very hard in the backside on my way out when I leant forward at that point and said, yeah, but have you tried it?
Yeah.
Have you actually made a change? Have you made a change? Have you run a split test? Have you done anything differently before you say it will? So surely and so certainly that it will die. Now, when old mate, let's call him Phil, died, that club continued.
Yeah, it did.
I was talking to a bloke last week from a fairly big club, but he was talking about one of the key volunteers who unfortunately passed away. Look, it wasn't a surprise. He was late 80s by the time he actually passed away, but he took so much knowledge with him.
Yeah.
Like I was talking to somebody only today who had a secretary resign. 50 years. 50 years this person had been doing the job. Wow. Like that's a long time. Is that good or is it bad? That's a thing. It is how that person has made it and how everyone else has supported that person. Because that person could have been a great secretary for 50 years. They could have been a great secretary for 5 years and overstayed their welcome by 4.5 decades.
And they could have spent the last 5 building systems and, honing the succession and continuity mechanisms in the club so that the club could continue to be successful after their departure.
Yep.
But I bet they didn't
Yeah. Yeah.
because they were busy doing the job.
Doing the job. Yeah. And not actually stopping to build a better system.
No, sorry. So I derailed your train of thought because I just want to jump in and highlight the importance of that peer network and having each other's backs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you see someone else nearing burnout or taking too much on and being young, enthusiastic, excited about the role, and I said young, what I really mean is fresh and green.
Right.
So from the outset, having to caution those people against taking too much on and being the fill.
Yeah.
Don't fill your bucket.
Where I want to start is something that I've talked about on social media previously, which is what are some signs that, and this is an external one, so what can you watch in your fellow committee members? And I call it quiet resignation. Because sometimes the resignation happens where people literally throw the toys out of the cot. Bleep this and bleep that and snoot you all from blah, 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 blah. And off they go. Storm out, smash the computer, slam the table, throw their chair out and walk out and never see them again until they realise they've left their keys and have to walk awkwardly back in to collect them. That happens, but I think it's really rare. I think what happens more is the very quiet resignation where people just start to drift away much more slowly. So it might start by people taking a bit longer to reply on email, but they're still there, they're still doing their things. And then it might extend to starting to miss some meetings and then not reply to the emails at all. And slowly the work that they were doing starts to drop off. But there's no point at which they say, I can't do this anymore, or even better, earlier, I need help. They just drift away. You can see that coming, but only if you know that it's a symptom. If you don't know that it's a symptom, you just ignore it, or you're oblivious to it, and you even start to blame that volunteer when they're the ones who are struggling, but you've missed the struggle. You've missed the way that they have communicated their struggle. They've communicated it by stepping back and and then they're absent, and then they're not returning phone calls, and then they're just gone. And eventually you go, oh, like maybe it's coming up to the next AGM. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to go around again. Of course you're not. You're burnt out, but there was no event. There was the same result, but there was no event that says, boom, now I'm burned out. I'm charred and black and my hair's singed and stinky. That didn't happen, but the result is the same. So you got to watch for that. But because it's quiet, it's hard to see.
Just a quick little technical challenge associated with this drifting away or quiet resignation of volunteers is that a club's constitution will often require resignation to come about in written form. So this is a mechanism that we've started to write into the constitutions that we're writing for clubs where it's appropriate, which is if someone goes AWOL, if someone just completely falls off the radar and stops replying, stops coming to meetings, there has to be some opportunity for you to give them an ultimatum, a deadline by which we're going to assume that you have resigned. But in many clubs' cases, they have to get a written resignation, or there has to be a removal from office at the general meeting by the members. So that's just a little interesting nerdy tidbit that it's important for clubs to be across. And if your constitution doesn't protect you against this drifting away from the committee role by a volunteer, then you might need to get in touch and get our help with the constitution rewrite.
Something else that happens with volunteers is, and this is something that they take on themselves, but again, they won't know they're doing it, but I'm pointing at every one of you that is doing this. Sometimes you make the job look way too easy. And so nobody actually knows that you're struggling. They don't know what's going on behind the scenes. They don't see, and you haven't even expressed the challenge for yourself to say, there's actually a lot more going on here than I've realized. We've talked about this cycle of competence. So it starts with unconscious incompetence. I don't know that I'm no good at something. Then you start doing, and I often use the example of driving, but of course you can assign this to any role, any volunteer role that has some element of technical ability. You start not knowing that you're crap at it until you start doing it. So you've gone from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. Ooh, now I tried it and I worked out it's difficult. Now I know that I'm incompetent. So driving is like this. Riding a bike was like this. As a kid, you'd watch other kids ride their bike and go, that looks easy. You get on and go, how does this work? Ah, that's why we wear helmets. But then you work at it and you work at it and you work at it. And then you get to the point of conscious competence. I can do it now and I know I can do it now. But then you do it so much, and this is the trap that volunteers fall into. You do it so much that you have unconscious competence. You don't know what you know. It's just there because you might have been doing it for 50 years. You might have been doing it for a long time that it's now just absorbed. It's part of what you do. That makes it almost not impossible, but very difficult for you to take that step back and onboard somebody else because you've unintentionally made it look too easy. Somebody else might have stepped up, or you may have even done the right thing and tapped other people on the shoulder, identify some people who could take on roles, but then not set them up for success by giving them the level of information that they know they need, but you don't know that they need it because you just assume they've got it because you've forgotten that you didn't know it at some point.
So this is kind of like um, the negative of the situation. Sorry, negative is in photographic negative. So the polar opposite of the situation of a volunteer taking lots on very visibly and running around like a headless chicken, and people thinking, goodness, there's no way I want to take that role on. This is at the other end of the spectrum, and a volunteer doing a similar thing, taking on too much work, but not sharing that they're drowning, and not to go back to that comment I made earlier, not setting the club up for success beyond their tenure. And for various reasons, I think that that's a challenge that a lot of clubs are faced with, is people not thinking beyond their time in the organisation. That doesn't make them a bad person, doesn't make them a bad volunteer. It's just human. We're very challenged to think beyond the time that we know we're going to be there, because that's the duration of our child's involvement in the junior sport, for instance.
Yeah, while I'm holding this mess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, mess is kind of the next one that I wanted to talk about, which is good volunteers are very good at hiding the mess. When
Yeah.
things get messy, they can kind of make it invisible because they just do more. So they do more to, and I don't mean mess as in literally a mess in the canteen or a mess in the merch stall. I mean a chaotic mess of an operation. So it's like the swan. On the surface, you just see this beautiful swan swimming across the surface, but underneath there's all of this churn. And they can hide that from themselves sometimes a little bit too much as well. And again, this comes back to the unconscious competence. They don't realize that all of the work that's going into it, but
Yeah.
other people can kind of get a sniff of it. And they say, well, I don't want to get involved because I don't want to have to do that chaos. But also then that means that the people who are involved don't get an opportunity to step away.
Mm.
Another one, and this is kind of similar to what you were talking about. Another one is that clubs become very dependent on reliable people. So we get good people for a time, and we just assume that that's what we can always expect. But like I said earlier, I don't think that there's a great substitutes bench full of other people willing to step up. And I talked to two people last week, both of whom said, independent of one another, that they do more than a full-time job volunteering after work. So they've got work, they've got family, and they've got volunteering. And they're doing, 38, 40 hours a week at work, 38, 40 hours a week volunteering. That only leaves time for getting some rest. Like it's so much work and it's because they're putting in that unfortunately the clubs start to rely on them, and they build a business model around reliable people
Yes.
rather than a business model that is looking into the future and saying we don't have people waiting to step up and take Phil, our everlasting volunteer's place when they drop off the perch. We've got to understand that the business model needs to change. We can't just continue to presume that we're going to have volunteers, which means that if we need to start paying people to do more jobs, we've got to be running the right sort of business that enables us to pay people to do that work.
And I think that just that simple change in terminology from club to business is really important too, to get people thinking differently. Because when we talk about businesses, we think about some entity that should exist beyond the time that any of the current staff are there. It's a business that has think about McDonald's. It's a business that has grown from quite humble beginnings to now, be in 1 billion locations around the world. I'm pretty sure that number's accurate.
Yeah, one McDonald's restaurant for every 8 people.
Feels like it. Feels
Not
like
much
it.
business going on here. To make it a viable franchise, everyone's going to have to eat a lot of Big Macs.
So, all right, so it might not be quite a billion, but that is a business that has endured well and truly beyond its founders. So I think that there's just a subconscious association with a business being something that needs to carry on successfully beyond the time that current people are there. Whereas in a club, we typically, you think about the external stakeholders, whether it's a governing body, whether it's a council, they typically associate the club with the people who are doing the work at that time, or the leaders at any given point. So I think we need to change the vernacular, and we need to start, and this is something that you and I have been doing a lot of, as have others here at CPRG, is talking about not-for-profits, talking about clubs as the businesses that they are, and building them to be businesses that can be successful beyond just this year or next.
I've talked about this before. I love to not think about not-for-profit as not-for-profit. I don't like the term. The ship sailed. It's called that. It doesn't mean you can't make a profit. It means that you are a business, but it's just the business model.
Yep.
The way that I like to think of not-for-profit is a retained working capital business model. Retained working capital. It means everything that we make as profit needs to stay here as working capital. That means we get better people, better facilities, better equipment, better programs, better services, better relationships, better marketing, better growth, because all of the money has to stay in. So don't think of it as not for profit. Think of it as retained working capital business model, baby.
It's fascinating though. Just yesterday, I had a meeting with a golf club that's in some financial strife for various reasons, primarily financial mismanagement by previous people. No, it doesn't seem like anyone's willfully done the wrong thing. They just stopped opening letters, and some of those letters are from regulators like liquor licensing and ATO.
Tax office.
Yeah, so compliance is difficult to maintain when you're not reading that correspondence.
Yeah.
But the wonderful treasurer who's taken on the role, not even a golfer, and is just really keen to support an organisation in her local area, has been a bookkeeper for 30 years. And even she had a concern about the fact that the club is financially doing very well, and has a pretty small club, has lots of money in the bank, but she was concerned that they were getting to the point where they had too much money in the bank, and we're not for profit. What are the ramifications of this? So she was very relieved to understand, as you just explained, the real definition of not for profit, which does not mean we can't make a profit, which does not mean we can't have too much money in the bank. There's no limit to the amount of financial success that we can achieve that will ever jeopardize our not-for-profit status. It just means that all of that money has to, as you just said, be reinvested as working capital into doing a better job. So there's that challenge, but there's also, I think, the reality that most clubs don't operate in the way that you just said. They do not consistently year on year get better because of doing great things financially. It just doesn't happen. And we've talked ad nauseum about the many factors that contribute to that, including in this discussion right now.
There is an important, it's not a caveat, but it's something else to think about when we talk about the not-for-profit definition. Yes, it means that you can make money. Yes, it means that you can retain that money. And yes, there's no limit to how much money you can have in the bank, but it's important for it to be balanced. So if it's members who have put that money in during a membership period, there should be an expectation that those members receive a proportionate amount of value during that same period. So we work.
That's a really good point. That is a really good point.
We work with many nonprofits who have a good system for managing that. So they've got, for instance, it might be a certain amount of money per member, or a certain amount, an amount that we want to have in reserves. The one that I like is a certain amount of months worth of trading saved away. So it might be 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months worth of trade. So if we know that our total budget for a year, I'm going to use round figures, is $1 million, that's what it's going to cost us to run this club for a year. Ideally, we want our income to be more than that so that we can grow next year and do more. But a rule of thumb might be we would like to get to a point where we have savings of $500,000, which means that we've got 6 months of trade, so that if we have another crackdown from a COVID type event that shuts everything down, we know that we can trade through for at least 6 months and keep everyone on and keep obviously our costs would go down if it was another shutdown, but at least if we've got staff, we can keep paying our staff if there's no replacement to JobKeeper that happened through COVID, for instance. But when I say members expect to receive an amount of value that's commensurate with their membership fees, it doesn't mean that it has to cost us that, because some of the value that we bring is intrinsic value from being at an event or taking part in a competition. There's an intrinsic value that we can't actually put a real dollar figure on it, so long as they're feeling that they're getting the value. So when we engage with members through crappy surveys that never bloody work and general meetings that never work, but proper engagement like making friends, talking on the sideline, that's what you want to get back. How does it feel to be a member? Where do you see the value? Let them tell us. They are our customers. Huh, how crazy would that be? Let our customers tell us what we want and listen to them and then make change for the next year. But we digress a little bit because we're talking about volunteers. And look, we're talking about business models again, because you can't decouple them. You can't separate running a good business from what we need to do to make sure we've got a sustainable workforce. But I'll go through three more before we wrap up. And remember, these are what I'm talking through are the symptoms to watch for in yourself and in others that can lead to burnout. What can happen is that the knowledge only lives here. We might have shoeboxes and we might have laptops and we might have systems, but if they're not where the information resides, if it's only in here for those people who volunteer for 50 years and then die, it goes with them. So,
and for those who are just listening, Michael's pointing to his head when he says here.
In here, thank you. Thank you. So if we're only focusing on what's in our heads, then how do we pass something else on? It's really difficult to hold a new volunteer to a certain standard of performance if we haven't actually shared a way to do that, because they can bring their own flair. But then remember when people used to talk about death by PowerPoint, when you'd go to a presentation and everyone just run their 30 slides of 12-point font on it? I never really worried about that. It's just PowerPoint. I'm interested in what the person's got to say and how they deliver. The real problem is death by spreadsheet. When people come in and they say, I can fix this, I'll put together a new spreadsheet. And look, yellow means this and green shading means that and red writing means the other. And they're just making things up. At least now with AI, we can interpret that a little bit and turn it into data. But just reinventing the wheel because nobody did anything to begin with is not a good way to be setting your job up so that somebody else can take over. We talked earlier about succession planning. Succession means actually having something to give to you. And the word succession includes the word succeed. We don't want to set people up to do a crap job. We want to give them everything, systems, processes, and it doesn't need to be really complex. And AI helps here as well. We want to give them everything that they need to succeed for themselves and to succeed us. English language, isn't it fascinating? The word succeed literally means to take over the throne.
Yeah, I did some research before a succession planning session, and is it successio is the
that
Latin
sounds
origin?
very Latin-y smart, Steve. So I'm going to say
You're welcome.
It
You're
is,
welcome.
yes. Hitherto and forthwith.
Oh, have you been reading that Constitution that I looked at last week?
So another problem is there's this funny thing, and we talked about this a couple of episodes ago when we were exposing the challenge with volunteering in the modern era, is there's people say, oh, it's just a volunteer role, but in reality, they and everyone else can expect professional standards. The worst thing there is when there's a disconnect. So when I take on a volunteer role, and some people take on a volunteer role like this, they get thrown the job and they just juggle it around for 12 months or 2 years, whatever the term is, they go, "Whoa," and give it away. And that's when there's no systems, there's no processes. It doesn't get better. The systems don't get better. The job doesn't get better. The club doesn't get better when that's all they do. They just juggle it for a year and throw it away. When it gets better is people who take on the role and say, well, I got a shit handover. I'm not going to badmouth the person who gave me a shit handover because they've got shit going on in their lives and they weren't available to give me the time when I needed the time. But I'm not going to do the same to the next person. I'm going to make sure that I spend a little bit of extra time now at the beginning of my term to set the job up so it's easy for me for the next year or two. Because then I know that all of these things that I'm packaging up from the beginning to make the next person more successful than me, I can hand it on to them when they begin. And it won't look exactly the same because I'll do the job next year and it will improve, but I won't just do the job better. I'll improve the system. So, what's just popped into mind, for instance, is that we're using Anthropic's Claude a lot. Now, if you're just using Claude and starting again, you're missing this cool thing in there called skills. You build a skill and then you let Claude run that skill each time and it will do it the same way. But when you come up with a better way to do it, Claude will ask, hey, do you want me to update the skill? That's exactly what we should be doing in our volunteer world. So look at that. We're taking AI learnings and applying them in the real world, using it as HI, human intelligence. You reckon that'll stick? But we need, and it's funny, sorry, that was a little bit of a rant because I'm in exactly that situation in one of my volunteer roles at the moment
I
where
was just going to say, this sounds
yeah,
uncannily like a volunteer role that you're
a little
filling.
prepared, a little well prepared. But I'm not, I'm not narky about it. I just know that the job's going to be so much easier for me if I do my own handover. But I'm not reinventing the wheel. I found all of the resources that I could, and I'm only plugging the gaps. So,
And you
and then
also know
when
you're going to leave the organisation better for you having filled that role for the time that you're in
yeah,
it too.
yeah, yeah. Easy for me, easy for the next person, but it takes that extra energy to begin with. So I can do the juggling once I've done the groundwork. If I don't do the groundwork and I just do the juggle and throw the job to somebody else, nothing gets better for anyone.
Mm.
So the fact that people expect professional standards also means that the business model needs to be able to cope with that. Because if the business model says we are volunteer only, only thou shalt only have volunteers, and there shall but be no more than X number of people on the committee, or no less than 17 people on the committee, like this is we're we're not then building a business that is sustainable. We're not building a business that is transferable when other people can come in and take on the job because there isn't that queue of people waiting on the subs bench to take on the 40 or 50 hour a week volunteer workload. But there are people who are prepared to do their bit. So long as they can either be strategic and focus on the governance, or they can be operational and get their hands dirty by getting out onto the field or onto the court or onto the track, great. Of course, they can do that. But we need to build a business model that says if we don't have volunteers doing all of that work, how are we going to get all of that work done? So the professional standards require us to raise our standards. And the last one that I wanted to talk about is that sometimes clubs only see the risk when it's too late. Sometimes they only see that this secretary who's been there, overstayed their welcome and has unconscious competence, they only see that they are a single point failure risk when it's too late, when they're gone. And that might be gone to another town or another country, but it might be gone as well. They might be 6 feet under. They might have
Mm.
spent up their years and have passed away, and they take all of that with them. It's very hard to recreate knowledge from somebody who's not around to give it to you, geographically or because they're no longer alive to be able to do it.
Yeah, and that just what you said then that the person might have reached the end of their life brings us right back to where we were early on in this discussion, and we talk a bit about the fact that we've got a choice as volunteers how we're going to spend our finite amount of time on this earth, and we're all going to reach the end of our life at some stage, and it's up to us to choose how we're going to spend that time. And building better business systems and working to you know, create meaningful succession so the next person can get started doing a great job straight away or thereabouts after you step away is a surefire way to ensure that people in their volunteer roles can be spending their time. And you touched on AI, and we're talking a lot at the moment about getting support from AI and looking for opportunities to automate the sorts of tasks that you're doing all of the time. So you don't have to waste your time on that crap. Coming back to spreadsheets, spreadsheet accounting is still something that we see quite a bit of in clubs and not-for-profits.
I
And
literally came across another club still doing it by hand last week.
wow, it's
Like
been a
in the
while
big
since I've
fold
had one
out
of those.
ledger. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
beautiful. And I bet it was in beautiful cursive, you know,
I speak in cursive sometimes.
in what's the calligraphy pen, you know. But that's a really difficult thing to hand over to the next person. Really
Yep.
difficult to back up too.
Yep. What a beautiful place to bring this to a close, Steve. That's absolutely right. We are, as humans, we have a choice. We can
Mm.
choose how we spend our time. So, some questions that I want to leave our listeners with is, and really practically, when you're in your next committee meeting, look around. Who are you most dependent on? Who's the one person in that room that you are most dependent on that you couldn't do without? What would happen if that person stepped away tomorrow? And to be fair, that person could be you, but I really want you to think about it. Next, I want you to think about which roles are too big for one person. When it comes to volunteer burnout, sometimes we've established roles that are just too big and they shouldn't be one role, they should be multiple roles. The sooner we figure that out, the sooner we can split them and the sooner we can find more people to fill them, either paid or voluntary, but that's how we solve that problem. Sometimes too much knowledge is trapped in people's heads. So I want you to look around your committee meeting next time you're sitting there with all of your fellow committee members and you're in that meeting as well and think, what knowledge is trapped in these people's heads that would go if they went? And what can we do about it to try and get it out and put it into practice so that all of these roles become transferable, either to another volunteer or if we choose to pay somebody to do that work in the future? Where are we relying on goodwill instead of good systems? Because sometimes when you rely too much on the goodwill of people who are there for the time that they're there, we become too reliant on those people. And if they go, there's a good chance the club won't fold, but there's a very good chance it's going to take a steep dip and it will be uncomfortable. And it's unnecessary discomfort. If we are just thinking about who we're relying on too much, who are our single point failures, and we don't have systems that are transferable if they go, then we're making life unnecessarily difficult for ourselves. And we can make it really easy just by having those systems. But it can be as simple as having an interview with those people with that information trapped in their heads. It can be as simple as understanding where people are putting in a massive effort, but they're just doing it because they know it's never been written down. And the last one is, if you had to pick just one piece of support or one thing to be trained in that would make volunteering better, maybe safer, but certainly more sustainable and more transferable, what would that system, bit of support or bit of training be? Because if you have to stop and think about those as questions and pose them to the rest of your committee, then you can come up with a plan. And that plan, it's just like building a house. You don't go and build a house without actually figuring out what's going to go where and do some measurements and some maths beforehand and do some planning. Dig a hole, see what the ground's like underneath it. It's exactly the same. Build a solid foundation for your volunteer workforce right from the beginning by providing the training, the support, and the assistance that they need when they need it.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Elegant.
Yeah. And you can see I think about
Philosophy.
this stuff a lot. Hey.
Mm.
Anyway, look, this is a big part of our lives, Steve. Like we're both volunteers. We both have done and will continue to do a lot of volunteer work. But I want to make sure that the volunteer work that I do makes somebody else's life easy, not just mine. I want the volunteer work that I do to matter. I definitely don't want the credit to be for me, though. I want to be able to measure the success of my job, my role in a volunteer capacity, to be based on the success of the person who comes after me, not the success that I get. That's because if you think like that, then you're making sure you're setting your organization up for success and you're providing the support and assistance that those who come after you are going to need. Wow. Anyway, we love this stuff. Steve, it's been wonderful to rant at.
Thank you for your basket case enlightenment. Yes.
But look, this is what basket case clubs is about. We want to turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs by identifying that there are things that you are doing that you should stop, that you're not doing that you should start. And that can be as simple as what you're thinking about, what's going on in your little noggin to make you a better volunteer and a better leader for your club and your people. Steve, thanks again. I look forward to rounding this out. There's probably more that we can talk about when it comes to volunteering, and I'm sure that we're
lucky this is a mini series.
Yes, well, and not a maxi series.
Yeah.
We've done some mini series that turned into maxi series,
yes,
haven't we? Yes. The financial management was definitely one of them. Look, when people talk to us about clubs, what do they say? They say, "Oh, bloody volunteers!" Or, "Gee, we just don't have enough money." Those are very often good starting points.
Yep.
All comes down to good governance, baby.
It does. Indeed. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to our next journey of basket casey goodness.
/ rant.
/ rants. And tangents.
Sometimes
and segues.
sometimes the air gets thin up here on my high horse. Thanks, Steve. See you next time.
Thanks, Mick. See ya.
Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.